Thanks for joining us today. The purpose of our podcast today is to talk about skin as a system. My name is Samantha Merritt, and here with me is the fabulous Kelly Tracy Holly.
Hello,
Today,
hello.
hi. So together we founded this podcast, Skin as a System, and we built Context Intelligent Aesthetics, which is a methodology that teaches practitioners and conscious consumers to read their skin as a system under variable load, not just as a surface that needs to find the right product. So this podcast is where we really dive in deep and use that terminology of unpack everything that's underneath the surface, why clients become reactive and why treatments stop working, especially when you feel like you've done everything right. Last week, we talked about a lot about barrier destabilization. So when the barrier is down, every product becomes a potential irritant. And that was really the main focus of that whole entire episode. But this episode, we're talking about why practitioners keep getting this wrong. Kelly, you've
I think I
noticed,
might
I
ha
mean,
I think
you've
I might
been
have a
working.
thought or 2 on that.
Yeah, yes, definitely. You've been in the industry for over 20 years. You've seen a lot. You've done a lot. You've treated a great number of clients. You've educated colleagues peer to peer. And so tell us what you're seeing. What practitioner pattern are you seeing?
So, I really think that the biggest thing is understanding that when we do go to school to become an esthetician, that we're basically taught the basics. And so, I think this is where the system is broken down, in a very important way. We're taught that skin is not part of a system, but it's symptoms that we're treating. And we're not really taught that those symptoms that are showing on the skin are caused by something else.
Right.
So I'm thinking, really, honestly, it's just an education breakdown. And if we don't learn to think outside the box as a practitioner and understand that there's more to the symptoms that we're seeing, that it's something inside the whole system, that's really where the problem is created. And when you first come out of school, you don't know anything. I mean, it's just spending all of the time and getting the experience. So that experience comes from if you take a client that is having hormonal push, so IVF, perimenopause, menopause, teen acne, right? We're seeing
Mhm.
the same symptoms, but it's what is in the system that's driving those symptoms. And we're not taught to address because we're skincare experts, right? So
Mhm.
we're taught to deal with just the skin, not the drivers of the symptoms. And I think that's where that communication breakdown comes from is recognizing patterns, but thinking those patterns fall into one protocol. And that's not, I mean, 20 plus years in the industry, and I can treat someone with acne different every single time someone presents with acneic symptoms or with stressor pushes, right? So we're talking somebody that didn't have acne, hasn't had acne their whole life, and now has acne because they have stress in their life. They're not eating as well as they should. They're not exercising anymore because they're just trying to get through life right now because they're in a stressful situation.
Mhm.
And so really it's looking at the patterns, addressing the patterns, and then adjusting those protocols and how you treat according to the patterns and
Right.
seeing what those drivers are. If somebody's not eating healthy, they're stressed out, they're eating bags of potato chips or whatever. And I don't care what anybody says. 22 years I've been in this. I haven't had good skin. I didn't have good skin. We were always taught in school, you don't discuss food and how foods trigger. But yet we have Crohn's, SIBO, IBS, and you can't tell me that those don't cause symptoms in the skin, eczema, seborrheic dermatitis, psoriasis. Those are all things and triggers, right? But they're not the drivers.
Right.
And the symptoms may be the same in somebody who has acne, but you don't treat them the same. and their treatments will never work. Or if they do work, it will be a very short period of time because you haven't addressed what's driving those triggers. And so education is really what it comes down to.
It's interesting that they would discourage like talking about those topics. I mean, in preparation, we've done our own research, extensive research, but we've also looked at a lot of data where they talk about today's client is not the same client it was even 5 years ago. I mean, the hormonal spectrum is so significantly changed in the last several years. And there's all kinds of theories and science and research behind why that is, because it could be different for different people. But the overtreating, not allowing their skin barrier to kind of rebound before the next treatment, overactives, utilizing overexfoliation of the skin, just constantly treating themselves with like a 12 and 14 step protocol, active after
Product
active after
jumping.
yes,
Yes. Trying
product
to
jumping.
find that one perfect product that's going to clear their skin overnight.
Right, exactly. And then the other part of that is that hormonal driver that is such a big part of what we educate about. I mean, if I use my own particular situation when you and I came together, my whole body was in a total, wreaked havoc state, going through IVF and hormone therapy, then IVF. And so my system was just under some significant amount of hormonal change and fluctuation. And it wasn't until I met you that you were like, okay, tell me what's happening in your life that this is happening. You've said, I'm sensitive. I've never been sensitive before. I'm reactive. I've never been reactive before. I have massive like cystic acne. I've never had that before. You're really the first esthetician to sit down with me and say, okay, let's kind of like take a couple of steps back and let's analyze what's happening in your life right now. So that gives me more context to what could be driving all of this,
Correct.
right?
Correct. Exactly. Because what happens is, again, back to education, we're taught protocols. If there are
Right.
these symptoms, we treat them this way. And even though we do an intake, and our intake can be very thorough, and we can ask these things: Are you going through medical this? What medications are you on? Those things. When did all of your symptoms start? How long have they been going on? What changed? Those change everything for the practitioner and how to treat the skin if you are looking at the system as a whole, which it really
Hmm.
is, right? And so
Hmm.
all of our symptoms are showing through our skin. But again, it goes back to that's not the driver. The driver is, what are you going through in your life? What changed? How long have you been going through this stress load? Or in your case, in your experience, the hormones that you were using for your infertility journey. And
Hmm.
so those aren't considered and haven't been considered and haven't been taught to be considered when we're talking in clinic protocols. And I think that's really important that as skincare therapists, we start to address those because, again, the protocols don't work. They're not working, or they work for a very short period of time. And once
Hmm.
the treatments stop, you can use the best home care in the world. But if you have these other things that are driving the system, the hormonal fluctuation or perimenopause, menopause, the lack of hormones that the body is no longer getting, um, the treatments aren't going to stay consistent and the results are not going to stay consistent.
Right. And that's where some of the peer to peer um, estheticians have been talking to you or talking to us about how they've had a client that they've had for a while and everything was very in line with treatment protocol. Everything was working and then it stopped working and then they get them stable again. And then, 6 months later or 5 months later, that result didn't stay. And so we're hearing that. I read an interesting article too about by 2040, the majority of people will need some sort of fertility intervention, which I find
Mind
crazy.
blowing.
Yeah. And this is extensive research by endocrine specialists. Like that's what that's their specialty. But in particular, that it discussed in this article as well about how a lot of women are entering perimenopause at a much younger age than 20 years ago. And that even meant biologically, like if they look at a 20-year-old today, the amount of hormones they're producing are significantly less than, say, in the 90s, an 18-year-old young man would have been producing, and what factors are influencing that. And so that's another topic, but it all comes in line with clients feeling frustrated that they're doing all the right things, they're using all the right stuff, and their skin is still not where they want it to be. And then also the esthetician going, what's happening? Like, this is the protocol. I'm using the protocol, but it's not working. So this is where we've identified that gap. There's that context intelligent aesthetics is what we've named it. And that's the gap. It's understand the context of what's driving that. So then you can adjust your protocol accordingly to achieve
Correct.
the results that you're looking for.
Yes.
Yeah.
And when you see changes in the skin, like your cystic acne and just acne in general, and now sensitivity, the protocols for those, usually when you have acne. The inflammation from the acne can cause sensitivity, but overall, it's not necessarily a whole skin sensitivity. It's usually where you have the breakouts, but now sensitivity is really playing a whole part in compromised barrier, the overuse of too many actives piled on top of each other, trying to find that perfect answer to
Hmm.
why all of a sudden my skin, your skin, others' skin is now more sensitive, more reactive. The access of social media plays such a big part into it too, because we
Hmm.
don't realize as a general consumer that skin is a system. So if we have acne, which I just go back to acne just because it's so influential to us, right? Because if
Hmm.
we have breakouts, we don't want that to be seen. And so we go back to that. I go back to that. And it's the same thing that you see on social media all the time. Well, I have acne. Who can help me? And then you
Hmm.
have 15 multi level marketing and influencers, content creators saying, use this, use this, use this. It cleared mine. It cleared mine. The problem with that is skin is a system, not a symptom. And each person's system is unique to themselves.
Hmm.
So again, there's a certain protocol that you can start with that we're taught to treat a symptom, but looking deeper than that to figure out, yes, we can treat your acne. We can use benzoyl peroxide and salicylic
Hmm.
acid and dry you out all day long. But if you're already sensitive, using those actives is just going to really destabilize your barrier. Your skin's going to go into protective mode and it's not going to absorb anything. It's not going to get the calm ingredients that it needs to help with the inflammation, help balance out that sensitivity so that you're not so sensitive anymore. So that's where it really comes in for us. And I think it's like our education piece and understanding content, intelligent aesthetics, and understanding the skin barrier and how it so easily can become destabilized makes a big difference in this education piece. And consumers are getting so much more intelligent in their choices of skincare and skin products, but it still doesn't make them want to stop trying to find that one product that's going to fix them. And so I think with results by nature and us really having this big education piece and helping other estheticians and consumers and other wellness providers understand that it's not just the protocol to
Hmm.
help, but actually going deeper uh, is is going to be a huge turn in this industry.
I agree with that. I agree with that. One of the things that strikes me is like I was speaking to someone the other day and she's an athlete and her skin looks amazing. And she said, I'm in my 60s and I just started breaking out and I don't know why. And of course, I noticed it as she said that. It's not something I saw or noticed in just talking to her. But here's a woman who takes care of herself. She's an athlete. She's won a lot of awards in her kind of age bracket and all of that. And she's concerned about acne. And I thought, well, that's just such a prevalent thing. It's kind of like, I feel like no one ever really grows out of that. If you didn't have acne when you were a teenager, but then you got it in your 30s or your 40s or your 50s or now even your 60s, it's one of those things that we want to just immediately erase and correct. And so it's one of those questions that how does a 60-year-old start developing acne? Because it is kind of like it's not something you would naturally automatically think of. Like I don't think of that.
You don't, but it's becoming more prevalent in every age group.
Mhm.
And basically, skin is a system, right? We keep saying it over and over again, but it is so true. There's something going on in her system that's triggering the acne. And so it's not taking that protocol and just going, oh, well, I'm going to go get a facial or I'm going to use a product that is good for acne in order to fight this. When if she has 2 or 3 or 4 breakouts, she doesn't really truly have acne. She just has some acne that's
Right.
rearing its ugly head because of something else that's going on in her system. And that's a big thing too that I've noticed in clinic is all age groups coming in and there's a couple of breakouts here and a couple breakouts here. And now there's some blackheads here, on their upper cheeks or their chin or underneath their chin area or along their glandular line on
Mhm.
their neck. And that's not acne. It's
Mhm.
a symptom that is showing itself as acne, but there's so much more underlying than that, especially if you haven't truly had like full blown acne.
Mhm.
Then when you get something like that, you're like, oh my goodness, I have acne. But really, you have symptoms that are showing up as acne. And I can almost guarantee that it's something else that's happening in your body. So
Interesting.
a toxin dump, a hormonal push, actually lack of hormones, extreme workout. So we have to think about this too. Testosterone is produced right when you work out. So male or female. So if you haven't been active for a while and all of a sudden you work out again, and then all of a sudden you have acne, well, you've just had a testosterone push. So that acne is a symptom of you having a testosterone push, even though you're doing something healthy. So it basically is like your system was in a good place, but now you just upped the game
Mhm.
and so now the skin went, wait, what's happening? There's a little bit of a change here. It's like with changing products or changing your diet, testosterone and working out is just another trigger. And so you just have to work through that trigger. And then once you've worked through that trigger, then skin can go back to what you're used to or what your norm is.
Mhm.
Again, back to your regular system, right? Or how your
Right.
system behaves regularly.
Right. Right. That's the whole thing that also people talk about that sensitive skin protocol, right? It's like you were telling me one time is like if someone presents themselves as sensitive, are they really sensitive or are they reactive? Is their skin barriers compromised and there's something else reactive happening? Right. But
Correct.
typically a practitioner would see a pattern like that and they would initiate a sensitive skin protocol.
Yes, when they see the reactivity. Sensitive skin also, I get clients come in clinic all the time that say, my skin is sensitive, my skin is sensitive. And so the biggest question I ask is, do you feel when you use something on your skin, it's tingly, burny, itchy, or you feel like you're very dry and tight? Or does your skin just get very red when you use a product or a new product? Because there's a
Hmm.
difference in that as well. And
Hmm.
so, I mean, I could do a whole page or 2 or 3 or 5 just on symptoms that present themselves as sensitivity that aren't necessarily sensitivity. And so could be reactivity, could be destabilized skin barrier, could
Hmm.
be too much use of actives. So when you start to use retinol based products and you go through that sensitive sloughing stage, then you could be sensitive. Did you just have a treatment? That can cause sensitivity. A
Hmm.
lot of times I just did microneedling yesterday, so I am a little bit sensitive today. So
Hmm.
when I cleansed my skin, yes, it was open and I used a very gentle cleanser, of course, but my skin felt sensitive and my
Hmm.
barrier is pretty stable.
Hmm.
So it can be anything from, and that's not a system thing, right?
Hmm.
So That's just basically a side note. I don't like to say, a side effect, but it's a little side note of having a treatment. And I
Right.
know in a few days, because I'm taking care of myself and using good lipids, that my skin won't feel sensitive afterwards because I do have a stabilized barrier. So there's so many things with that sensitivity that could be talked about.
Yeah, so much context.
Yes,
That's the whole thing, is the whole context of everything.
exactly.
Yeah.
Skin is a system.
Yeah.
So look deeper than just what the protocol says.
Mhm.
Make those protocols deeper, see what's happening in the system to see why the symptoms are occurring and understand the context of what we're talking about.
That's an interesting thing too, is like, because your intake form is probably the most comprehensive intake form I've ever taken. And there's a good reason for it. But like, if someone comes in describing reactivity to you, it's like what questions you're actually trying to answer. So it's like, so for example, if you were to ask on an intake form, if someone's, if you, one of the questions I think you have on there is, is your skin feeling sensitive or reactive? You ask deeper layer questions beyond that. But then
Yeah,
you take that information, which then leads into another question, just to give you more context of what's happening for that particular client at that time.
correct.
And that to me is very fascinating because I haven't seen that a lot. And it's not like, I mean, you're my one true tried esthetician for like life now. But prior to finding you, I've gone to, a lot of different estheticians. And all very accomplished in their own right.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but never asked me questions like that. And so I guess what I'm asking is what would be your advice to a practitioner? What's something simple they could do to learn or to implement some context-based question to give them more insight for the client, or or on the customer side, if someone's listening and saying, "Hey, yeah, I've never really been asked, a whole lot of in-depth questions." What kinds of questions would you want a customer or a potential client asking of you as a practitioner?
So the standard questions on most intake forms, so I kind of have to go backwards a little bit in order
Okay.
to answer that question. And it depends on how many pages you want your intake form to be.
Right.
So I ask the basics, but kind of in a deeper way. Like so many times, like I have, are you pregnant? Are you wanting to become pregnant? Are you close to your cycle? 7 days
That all
before,
makes a
7 days
difference.
after on it. Not all client intake forms ask that question.
Mhm.
Intake forms will ask you, of course, do you have any allergies? At least most of them should.
Good.
And what medications are you on? Because medications can cause photosensitivity. And so
Mhm.
you need to know those, especially if you're an advanced esthetician. Medications also create other symptoms, which can then be barrier, right? That can destabilize the barrier because they cause dehydration and and other symptoms. And
Mhm.
so my biggest go-to would be is to ask the basic questions. But when you get the client in your room, you don't just look over the intake form and be like, okay, they have acne, but like, I'm not going to ask somebody a personal question on the intake form of, are you going through deep stress in your life? That comes through personalization.
Mhm.
And when we are stressed, let's just take divorce for an example. If someone's going through a divorce, they're not going to want to put that down as an answer on a question. Like we could make it generic and say, are you experiencing any stress in your life right now? Or how's your diet? But again, then the form gets longer and longer and longer and longer.
Mhm.
So the biggest take away in this conversation would be read between the lines, read their body language, look at their skin, see how they hold themselves.
Mhm.
And once you're in there face to face, give them a little bit of you
Mhm.
so that they'll give you back some of them. Because so many times I get an intake form and it specifically states medications, vitamins, and supplements, and that form will be blank. Now that it's digital, it can't be blank. They have to put something in
You have
there.
to fill it
But
out.
so many times they'll come in and I'll be like, hey, let's talk about medications. Like, are you on birth control? Oh, yeah, I didn't think about that. Okay, well,
Mhm,
which kind of birth control are you on?
mhm.
Are you on one that is a combination of estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone? And is this new to you? Like, how long have you had it in? Have you had it in too long? And now you're not getting the hormones that you were getting. And so now we're seeing symptoms in the skin. So there's so many things that experience has taught me to start to ask. And this could be laid out, right, in an education piece for
Mhm.
estheticians to make it more context intelligent, right?
Yeah,
Because this is context, and the context of what we're learning is what makes us understand that skin is a system, not just treating symptoms.
right.
And I think that's the takeaway right there. You have to understand really what questions are the important questions to ask that lead up to understanding what's going on in their system. Because you can say the medications all day. And do you know your medications? And if you don't know your medications and there's a medication on that list, you better be taking 2 seconds to pull it up on the computer really quick to see if it's photosensitizing, to see what the side effects are so that you know, because you can have someone come in and their skin looks like their barrier's stable and they have good moisture and they don't have a lot of broken capillaries or hyperpigmentation, and you can boom start working on them and you've got I'm at a 10, this is
Yep.
too burny, it doesn't feel good, I don't like this, take it off. um and if that happens, you
There's
probably haven't
something going.
done a great job of asking the right questions.
Yeah. And that's true for a lot of professions, right? The more experience you get, the more you start adapting kind of your style of how you relate to clients or potential clients. But, there's also relationally, there are people that are like, oh, what do they need to know that for? How is that relevant? Well, it is
Uh,
relevant.
I get that question all the time. Like,
Yeah.
why do you need to know if I'm on my period?
Yeah.
Well, let me just tell
Well,
you.
let me
Let
tell
me
you.
break it down for you. Let me break it down. And it's the funniest thing. Or why do you need to know what medications I'm taking?
Hmm.
Those two are the two biggest questions from my intake form. But see,
Hmm.
it's beautiful. I love that they ask it because they are knowledgeable about themselves and their body, and they want to know, wait, how do these pieces fit together? Which is
Yeah.
a perfect conversation to go into a little bit more personal to
Hmm.
understand what's happening in the system to explain to them why they're having the symptoms.
Right. I love that. I love that. One of the things that you taught me too was that, if it's displaying on the skin, it's been ruminating in that body for a little bit. It's not.
Churning and churning and
Yeah, it just
churning.
yeah,
Yes,
there's been a specific amount of time, it fluctuates person to person, but your body's been working on it for a little bit.
absolutely. We think that
Yeah.
acne happens overnight and it doesn't.
Mm-mm.
Well, sometimes. I eat a piece of chocolate cake or a bite of chocolate cake or a brownie and I have a pimple the next day.
Interesting.
And
Okay.
I know that but it's my system saying, "We don't
Yeah, we
like
don't like
sugar.
that.
Why'd you just eat sugar?" Like,
Yeah.
"No. No, thank you."
Yeah, mine does that with alcohol. Not break me out, but I feel miserable. Like if I just have a sip of alcohol, I feel miserable the
Yep.
rest of the evening and well into the next day. Is I'm like, really? Okay, well that's good. I guess that's good.
Yeah, it's not worth it, but I
It's
guess it
not
keeps the
worth
bad
it.
habit away.
Yeah, it's not worth it. And high fat things too, but that's off topic.
Yes. We could actually do a whole podcast on food, literally.
Yeah, well, I think we should because what our listeners or people watching this podcast might not know. You are also a certified holistic nutritionist. You spend a lot of time educating on the gut and skin axis. It's this gut, and we call it the gut brain skin axis, but you really drive that that correlation home, which, again, is skin as a system. We're biology, we're nature. So it's
Right.
your body has a natural intelligence. And so when you honor it and you treat it with respect, it has an incredible capacity to reverse things and to give itself what it needs to stabilize, which is pretty fascinating.
Absolutely.
But you spend a lot of time on your clinic side educating on that piece, which is fascinating information.
Yes,
Yeah.
I have, because I was a
Yes.
perfect example. I knew in school, and I would argue with my educators over and over and over again. They're absolutely right. They say there is no scientific studies, no clinical studies that say food is correlated to what's happening with your skin.
Wow.
But why? Why would we put test subjects in, right? We're going to grab
Mhm.
350 people or 400 people or 19 people and feed them junk food, and then have the placebo group where we're feeding good food and show the difference of the skin. I mean, why would we do that? Why would we purposely
Yeah.
feed people the wrong kind of foods just so that we could see the studies of what happens in their skin? And so I get that, but I'm so tired of hearing there's no scientific evidence, because
Right.
I'm evidence. My teenage clients are evidence. The first
I
thing that
know.
I do is take away their caffeinated drinks.
Uh,
2 weeks. You got to give me 2 weeks. I make a little bet with them. So you have to take away the high caffeine and the sugar and the potato chips, and like, tell me your favorite food. This is what I want you to eat. You've got 2 weeks. Increase your water intake, get away from the caffeinated drinks. And guess who always wins the bet? I do. And they come back and they're like, I don't understand. Like, if I would have known this, I would have changed my eating habits.
yeah.
So,
Yeah. The whole
again, a
skin.
podcast for another day, but
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I mean, it makes sense when you put all the pieces together, but we don't intuitively think about it that way. I don't think a lot of people intuitively think about it in that way.
right.
Yeah. Well, fantastic. Well, thank you for all of this insightful information. And so it wraps up our Skin as a System podcast today, pattern recognition. So, but before we go, if our skin as a system is bringing you value, we would so greatly appreciate it if you would share our podcast with others and spread the word. You can find us on Spotify, also on YouTube. And then, of course, you can always find us at Results by Nature. If you wanted to email us at hello@resultsbynature, we read every email and respond to you guys personally. But Kelly's got a teaser on next week's episode. I think it is. Do you?
And what's that teaser?
Things that you constantly see in the treatment room that no one actually has a clean answer for.
Why our skin suddenly stops responding to products that used to work?
Yes.
Guess what? Guess what the teaser is? It's not the products. Come
Nice.
back and find out what it actually is.
I love it. Love it. That's it for today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Talk soon.